The story begins at midnight in London, where a young girl named Sophie is busy locking all the doors and windows of her orphanage because she knows this is the time when people mysteriously disappear. While Sophie is taking these precautions and the other orphans sleep, an immense shadow looms over the quiet streets. Sophie stays awake in her bed, reading a book. The orphanage cat notices something outside and walks onto the balcony. Sophie follows the animal and spots an enormous man standing down in the street. The giant realizes that the little girl has seen him. Terrified, Sophie hides beneath her blanket, but the giant reaches inside the building and takes her away, blanket and all. Holding her carefully, the giant begins to make his way out of the city. He manages to avoid being seen by any onlookers using a variety of clever tricks. Once clear of the town, he bounds across the countryside toward the cliffs, taking giant leaps with his long legs. Eventually, he takes a massive leap and plunges straight into the clouds. They land in an unfamiliar country, where he carries Sophie into his home. He suspends Sophie up in her blanket and starts chopping vegetables for a stew. Sophie attempts to sneak away when his back is turned, but she makes a loud noise that alerts him. The giant talks to Sophie, explaining that she cannot escape without wings. When Sophie asks where they are, he explains that they are in giant country. As noises of other giants echo from outside, Sophie begs him not to harm her. The giant chuckles and reassures her that he is not a frightening creature and would never hurt a human. Sophie argues that he is indeed unkind because he took her away. He replies that he feels terrible about doing so, especially considering the feelings of her mother and father. Sophie explains that she is an orphan and has no parents. She asks if the other giants are friendly like him, but he warns that they are cruel and would harm her without hesitation. He also mentions that compared to the others, he is a mere runt, as they are truly colossal. When she asks why he took her, he explains that it was necessary because otherwise, she would tell people about him, leading to his capture and confinement. Sophie promises to keep his secret and begs to go home, but he remains unconvinced. He states that she must spend the rest of her days here with him. Sophie threatens to escape if he does not release her, but he warns her that leaving his home alone would result in her being captured by the others. The giant pulls out a jar containing a moving blue light, which sparks Sophie's curiosity. He explains that it is a dream, though Sophie objects that dreams are not physical objects. The giant begins reading her book, and Sophie soon drifts off to sleep. While she is asleep, the giant goes into a hidden area of his home filled with numerous jars of glowing, moving lights. He takes a jar with a red light and begins to prepare it. Sophie wakes up and sees that her captor is asleep. Seizing the moment, she tries to escape through an open window. However, as she runs, a much larger giant suddenly appears in front of her and grabs her. Sophie screams for assistance, but the friendly giant merely shuts the door of his cave because he feels powerless to stop it. The massive giant tosses her into the air and sweeps her up. Sophie wakes up and realizes it was actually a dream that the friendly giant gave her to demonstrate that dreams really do exist. The next morning, the giant is drinking a bubbly beverage called frobscottle, and Sophie notices that the bubbles in the liquid sink downward rather than rising. When she points this out, he explains that upward floating bubbles cause terrible belching. Sophie argues that downward floating bubbles probably escape in a much more unpleasant manner, but he is completely unbothered by this. He then releases a huge burst of gas that propels him off the floor like a rocket. He thoroughly enjoys the sensation. At that moment, one of the massive, hostile giants arrives, and the friendly giant quickly conceals Sophie to protect her from danger. Sophie hides inside a large vegetable and barely escapes being found after the friendly giant convinces the visitor that he detests vegetables and only seeks humans. Afterwards, the friendly giant brings Sophie deep into his cave and helps her tidy up. He provides her with several garments so she can choose a new outfit. When Sophie puts on a red jacket she finds, the giant stares at her with a strange, sorrowful expression. Sophie asks him what is wrong, but he remains silent. He places her in a cozy room built inside a tree and mentions that he is heading out to do his job of capturing dreams. Sophie asks to tag along, but he strictly declines her request. Left alone, Sophie watches some of the bottled dreams begin to take shape. She stubbornly insists on accompanying the friendly giant until he eventually gives in. Stepping outside the cave, they find the cruel giants sleeping nearby. As they try to slip past, the beasts wake up and grab the friendly giant's leg. Sophie quickly runs to hide inside a ruined car while the aggressive giants begin to mistreat him. They toss and kick him around like a toy ball. Sophie is shocked to see that he refuses to defend himself. Suddenly, a downpour begins, and the hostile giants scatter for shelter because they detest water. The friendly giant scoops Sophie into his bag and runs off. Without realizing it, he leaves Sophie's blanket behind, which the other giants sniff out, revealing to them that he is keeping a human. Sophie and the giant eventually reach a magical place he calls Dream Country. Sophie notices that the stars above are exceptionally bright. The giant explains that when the sky is clear, his massive ears can hear music echoing from the stars. He adds that he can also hear insects communicating underground, bugs walking on leaves, plants talking to one another, and all the hidden whispers of the world. Sophie looks at the reflection of a massive tree in the water and realizes it is teeming with dreams. The giant shares that someone once referred to him as the big friendly giant. He plunges into the water, stepping into another dimension. He invites Sophie to follow, and she does so. Together, they stand before the tree where all dreams originate. The big friendly giant spots a golden dream and mentions that it is a highly rare variety. He attempts to capture it, but the dream keeps slipping away. The dream slows down near Sophie, prompting him to say that it recognizes her. He adds that when he listens closely to it, he can hear her voice. He seals the dream inside a jar, labeling it as Sophie's dream. Sophie assists him in catching dreams until she discovers a red one, which is a nightmare. The giant catches the red dream and explains that it is a dream of regret. It forces people to see the terrible things they have done, convincing them that they cannot be forgiven. The giant then pulls Sophie back out of the dimension, and they continue on their journey. As they walk, Sophie decides that she will call him the Orion from now on. Sophie and the Orion arrive in London, where the giant uses his long trumpet to send happy dreams to sleeping people. He describes the happy dreams to Sophie, which she finds delightful. On their journey back, they witness the other giants heading out to find children to capture. Sophie insists that they must find a way to stop this situation. As they speak, they also realize that her blanket was left behind in Giant Country, causing the Orion's expression to turn serious. After that, Sophie wakes up outside the orphanage. The Orion explains that because her blanket was left behind, the other giants now know about her, meaning she is no longer safe with him. Sophie argues that they can stop the others together, but the Orion tells her about a boy he once brought to Giant Country. The boy had spotted him just as Sophie did, forcing the Orion to take him away. He reveals that the red jacket Sophie found belonged to that very boy. Eventually, the other giants discovered the child, and the Orion failed to return him home before they could harm him. The Orion states that he will not make the same mistake with Sophie and leaves, despite her protests. Sophie sits on the balcony of the orphanage and speaks aloud to the Orion, knowing his sharp hearing can pick up her voice. She mentions that she can feel him nearby and, to force him to show himself, she leaps off the balcony. The Orion catches her safely. The two return to Giant Country and begin formulating a plan to defeat the other giants. At that moment, the hostile giants arrive and begin searching the entire house for Sophie. They destroy the Orion's work as they search. Sophie narrowly avoids being caught, and the Orion finally decides he has had enough. He drives the cruel giants out of his cave with a burning metal rod. Meanwhile, Sophie hides in the small room the Orion built for the previous boy. She notices a portrait of the Queen and devises a plan. They create a specific dream for the Queen, showing the hostile giants harming children and the military stopping them. The dream also features Sophie and the Orion. Once she wakes up from this dream, Sophie and the Orion plan to meet her, expecting her to be receptive to their message. They travel to the palace and blow the dream toward the sleeping Queen. The Queen wakes up and describes the dream to her assistant, who finds it striking because children have indeed been vanishing across the country. As the assistant goes to close the curtains, she finds Sophie standing there, and the Queen recognizes her from the dream. Sophie explains the whole situation, and the Queen believes her because she just witnessed it in her dream. Sophie then introduces the Orion to the Queen, who politely but awkwardly greets him. Next, the queen alerts her generals to the giant threat while arranging a lunch for the Orion. Because of his giant size and habits, the lunch becomes an awkward and highly amusing event. The Orion even shares his frobscottle with the queen, her servants, and her generals, causing them to experience severe gas. Afterwards, the Orion guides the royal army to Giant Country. He prepares a dream of regret for the hostile giants so they will wake up feeling remorseful and become easy to capture. Sophie and the Orion sit down together to discuss her golden dream. Sophie asks what the dream represents, and the Orion explains that it is her dream of leading a normal life. He tells her she will have that life, but not here in Giant Country. She must return to her own world. When Sophie asks if he will still hear her calls, he simply points to his large ears in response. When it is time to blow the dream toward the sleeping giants, the Orion realizes he left his trumpet back in London. While his attention is elsewhere, Sophie grabs the jar and creeps directly into the midst of the sleeping giants. She is just about to open it when one of the giants wakes up. Sophie manages to break the jar, successfully giving the other giants the regretful dreams, but the first giant remains awake and unaffected. He is about to attack Sophie when the Orion steps in to protect her. The hostile giant is preparing to punch the Orion when the royal army arrives and restrains him. The army captures and restrains all of the cruel giants, carrying them away and freeing Giant Country from their threat. The hostile giants are transported to a secluded island with no way of escape. For the rest of their lives, the only food they are provided is vegetables. They are thoroughly displeased with this diet. Soon after, Sophie wakes up in the Queen's palace and is greeted by her assistant. Meanwhile, the Orion has Giant Country entirely to himself. He spends his time growing a garden of vegetables and writing a book about his experiences. Back at the palace, Sophie whispers good morning, Orion to the air, confident that he can hear her from anywhere, and indeed he does as the story ends.
Please like and subscribe.